All right, so today we're diving into something really interesting, I think. We're talking all things green initiatives, but maybe not how you'd expect.
Definitely not the typical conversation.
We've got this article by Joel Kotkin, and it's really got us thinking.
Yeah, it's pretty provocative.
It challenges a lot of the common ideas about going green, especially when it comes to the economics of it all.
Exactly, like we all want to be environmentally conscious, right? But what if some of these green initiatives, while well-intentioned, could actually end up having negative impacts on Western economies?
That's what Kotkin seems to be suggesting,
And he really digs into how these policies could actually be giving a leg up to countries like China.
which is a whole other layer to this, isn't it? I mean, we often hear about the environmental impact of going green, but Kotkin really brings the economics to the forefront. He uses Canada as a really interesting case study, specifically when he talks about the carbon tax.
Yeah, that's a big one.
He argues that this tax, while meant to, reduce emissions, could actually end up hurting Canada's GDP growth,
And it's not just a small dip he's talking about. Kotkin suggests it could be a full percentage point.
which is significant. And then he gets even more granular with it, pointing out that this impact wouldn't be evenly distributed.
Right. It's not just about the overall numbers, it's about who's actually feeling the effects.
And Kotkin highlights how energy-intensive provinces, like Alberta, could be hit particularly hard. He even suggests that thousands of jobs could be lost, especially blue-collar jobs.
Which is a real concern, right? We're talking about people's livelihoods here.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, are these policies potentially harming the very people they're supposed to be helping? I mean, is it possible that we're so focused on the environmental benefits that we're overlooking the economic realities, especially for the working class?
It's a valid question. And it feeds into this larger dilemma, this balancing act that governments all over the world are trying to manage. How do you pursue these really important environmental goals, but also address the very real economic concerns of everyday people?
Especially when you're talking about potential job losses and rising energy prices, which, let's face it, affect everyone. And speaking of tricky situations, Kotkin then points to Europe, specifically Germany.
Oh, yeah. Germany's been in the spotlight a lot lately with this whole energy transition.
Exactly. Kotkin uses them as almost a cautionary tale, arguing that their aggressive push towards renewable energy has had some pretty serious consequences,
Like what?
like sky-high energy prices and even industries leaving the country.
He's not wrong. Germany's energy prices have definitely been volatile, to say the least. And there has been some concern about industrial competitiveness as they transition away from more traditional energy sources.
It really underscores the complexities of trying to make this shift away from fossil fuels,
Yeah.
especially for countries like Germany with these deeply industrialized economies.
Right. It's not just a matter of flipping a switch. We're talking about massive infrastructure changes, new technologies, and rethinking how we generate and distribute energy on a fundamental level. And all of that takes time, investment, and careful planning.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Kotkin argues that China, often seen as, not exactly a leader in environmentalism,
Yeah, to put it mildly.
he argues that they might actually be in a position to benefit economically from the West's push for green energy.
Which seems kind of counterintuitive at first glance, right?
Totally. But he makes this really interesting point that China, while being a major polluter themselves, they're also strategically positioning themselves to dominate the industries that the West is relying on for this green future.
It's like they're playing the long game, thinking a few steps ahead.
Exactly. And, we're talking about things like solar panel production, electric vehicle manufacturing areas, where China is already a global powerhouse.
They're definitely ahead of the curve in a lot of ways when it comes to these green technologies.
And get this, Kotkin points out that China's actually using its continued access to fossil fuels to power the growth of these industries. They're basically playing a different game entirely.
Okay, yeah, that is pretty interesting. It's like they're using the very thing the West is trying to move away from to fuel their dominance in the industries of the future.
Right. It really makes you think about global power dynamics in a whole new light.
Hmm.
Is the West, with all the best intentions, are we essentially handing China a competitive advantage in the long run? Like we're hamstringing ourselves while they're strategically positioning themselves for dominance.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we're going to have to grapple with as we move forward in this global energy transition.
It's almost like we're so busy trying to do the right thing, going green, that we haven't really thought through the potential consequences.
It's a classic case of good intentions maybe not leading to the desired outcome.
Exactly. And Kotkin even goes so far as to suggest that some of this Green pushing might be driven more by politics than
Well,
by, actual concern for the environment. Like it's
yeah.
more about looking good than actually doing good.
There's definitely an element of that, right? Like this whole idea of green virtue signaling that he talks about,
Yeah, like it's become this moral imperative, and anyone who questions it is, labeled a climate denier or something.
which makes it really difficult to have these nuanced conversations about the trade-offs and the potential downsides.
For sure. And those downsides are real, especially when you consider the potential for, like, backlash from everyday people. Kotkin specifically mentions Biden and Trudeau, suggesting that they could face a lot of pressure from voters if these green initiatives lead to higher energy bills or job losses.
Oh, absolutely. People are already feeling the pinch, right? Like the cost of living is going up, energy prices are volatile, and it's natural for people to start questioning whether these policies are actually making their lives better or worse.
Exactly. And Kotkin points out that Germany, for example, they've already seen a pretty significant increase in energy prices because of this rapid shift to renewables.
Yeah, their energy market has been through a lot of upheaval, and while in the long run, reducing their reliance on fossil fuels is probably a good thing, you do have to wonder about those short-term costs and who ends up bearing the brunt of them.
It's like we're so focused on this like utopian vision of a green future that we're not really thinking about the very real possibility of economic hardship along the way.
It's a balancing act for sure.
And Kotkin seems to be arguing for a more balanced approach,
Yeah.
one that considers the complexities of the global energy market, not just the environmental impact, but also the economic and geopolitical factors at play.
Absolutely. Because becoming too reliant on other countries for energy, especially countries with, shall we say, unpredictable governments.
Or governments that don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
Exactly. That creates a whole different set of risks. Kotkin even mentions countries like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, countries that have a bit of a history of using energy exports as a political tool.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely not afraid to play hardball. It's almost like we're so focused on breaking free from one type of dependency on fossil fuels that we're at risk of falling into another, potentially even riskier form of dependency.
It's like jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
And that could have some serious implications, not just for our economy, but also for national security and our standing in the world.
Right, because energy security is about more than just keeping the lights on. It's about maintaining our autonomy, our ability to make decisions that are in our best interests without being beholden to other nations.
So it's not just about going green, it's about going green in a way that doesn't leave us vulnerable or compromise our values. It's about finding a way to do both.
Precisely. And that requires a much more nuanced and strategic approach, one that goes beyond just like demonizing fossil fuels and embracing renewables without thinking about all the other factors involved.
So it's not enough to just jump on the green bandwagon.
Yeah.
We really need to think strategically about how we transition away from fossil fuels in a way that makes sense for everyone.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Kotkin seems to be advocating for a more, I don't know, a more measured approach, one that considers all these different factors.
And acknowledges that there might not be, like, a perfect solution, right?
Exactly. It requires a lot of critical thinking, which I know you're all about.
Always up for a good challenge.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder if these really rapid green initiatives, like if they come with these potential downsides, what's the alternative? How do we make progress without shooting ourselves in the foot?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, there's no easy answer, but I think Kotkin's article at least gives us a good starting point for thinking about it.
Totally. So what do you think? Where do we go from here?
Well, for one, maybe we need to rethink this idea of a rapid transition. Like maybe a more gradual approach makes more sense.
So we're not just like ripping off the Band-Aid and hoping for the best.
Exactly. We need to make sure people have reliable, affordable energy in the meantime while we're figuring out these new technologies.
Which means investing in research and development, right?
Yeah.
Like really putting some serious resources behind finding those next generation
No,
solutions.
absolutely. And not putting all our eggs in one basket either. We need to explore a range of options, nuclear, carbon capture, all of it.
Diversify that energy portfolio.
Exactly. That way, we're not beholden to any one source or any one country.
It's like we're trying to create a better future, but we have to be smart about it, right? We
Right.
can't just rush in blindly.
Exactly. Thinking long term, considering all the angles.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It's really got me thinking about these issues in a whole new light.
It's definitely a complex topic, but that's why we're here, right? To unpack these challenging ideas.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, Keep those questions coming. Keep digging deeper. And most importantly, don't be afraid to challenge those assumptions. Until next time, happy diving.